This is David Leffler, the host of Fumed. Before we get started, consider donating to Public Health Watch, the nonprofit news outlet that produced this podcast. Investigative reporting is expensive, and we need your support to keep it going. Go to publichealthwatch.org to contribute. Thank you. Texas has always been a place built on bravado. A place where the lines between bravery and recklessness, between boldness and ruthless ambition, tend to blur. That cutthroat mentality, that unyielding opportunism, is how a small group of settlers wrestled Texas away from the Mexican government. It's what transformed a poor agrarian state into an international powerhouse forged by black gold. But there's another side of the Texas story. One of unabashed greed and the people who suffer at its hands. One that's unfolding along the San Jacinto River's choppy waters even as you listen to this podcast. One that will destroy any sense of security Carolyn Stone and Greg Moss once had.
For an ambulance, hello caller. Can you confirm the address of your emergency?
My neighbor's house.
Do you see smoke and fire? Where's the fire coming from?
It's coming from it looks like from the front of it right now.
Front?
It's Greg Moss's place.
I'm David Leffler. This is the final episode in this season of Fumed, an investigative podcast from Public Health Watch about the people who live in the shadows of America's chemical plants and oil refineries. We've been following a group of stubborn Texans trying to salvage what's left of their working class community. That's a problem, though, because they live in East Harris County, where the petrochemical industry calls the shots. When we left off last time, Carolyn Stone and Greg Moss had created a community organization to save their neighborhoods from total industrialization. But now their goal has changed. Instead of simply trying to preserve a vanished way of life, they're trying to preserve life itself. Their lives, the lives of their friends, their neighbors, the strangers they meet at the grocery store. As they see it, the growing parade of chemical barges floating near their neighborhoods has set the stage for a disaster of unthinkable proportions. Many of the barges are parked near homes and a playground. Some pass by a Superfund site packed with cancer-causing dioxin. And it's all taking place in a narrow stretch of river where hurricanes and floods are routine. What angers Greg and Carolyn most is that Texas leaders and U.S. regulators are watching from the sidelines as the dangers mount.
They're all going to say, oh, if we only knew this would happen. Oh, son of a bitch, we've been telling you that for 10 years what's going to happen. And you chose to ignore it for the almighty buck.
Part 4. Locked and Loaded. I'm going to begin this last episode by taking you back for a minute to a sweltering afternoon in July of 2023, where I got a new and unsettling perspective on Channelview's plight. Carolyn and I were on a pontoon boat in the middle of the San Jacinto. Dozens of barges were just feet away, pressed together like giant steel piano keys. Tugboats chugged by, blaring their horns and belching black smoke into the sky. The stench of chemicals lingered before being swept away by swirling winds. Carolyn leaned over to me with a nervous smile.
I kind of got a little racy heart right now. You cannot get the gravity, the entirety of the impact unless you're down at this level. Just how far it goes and just how many barges there are.
One of Carolyn's friends was giving us this unusual river tour. 3 other Public Health Watch reporters were there, and a couple members of Carolyn's advocacy group. After pushing off near Greg's house in the river bottom, we'd gone south of the I-10 bridge, past a minefield of barges, to the murky middle ground between South Channelview and the Houston Ship Channel. We were all a little on edge. Waves from passing cargo ships shook our boat before they smashed into the barges. Carolyn gripped a metal railing as we veered closer to the mammoth containers.
So the passage through here is, we're playing chicken with barges and tugs. And that's what it is. When you get in their way, they can't stop. They're going to run you over.
I steadied myself against a plastic seat cushion and mouthed, "Holy shit," to my fellow reporters.
We're looking out, looking north, and I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. I think 34 barges I'm counting, and I can't even see everything from here.
Many of the barges had red cautionary flags and white signs marked with big black letters. "Warning, dangerous cargo," they read. Or, "Danger, benzene." Other barges had no signs at all, even though they were most likely carrying chemicals too.
So when there's an incident and there's a first responder out here, they have no idea what they would be responding to. The same thing as us as residents. We have no idea what kind of hazard that we have next to us.
We could see Carolyn's neighborhood, but it felt like we were in the middle of a war zone. Or better yet, the Wild West that had so fascinated my father, a Texas historian. A place with few rules, and where power and profit often went unchecked. I've been to Channelview at least 30 times since Public Health Watch started this project. My dog Deanie and I had learned to love the 3-hour drive. We listened to my favorite Houston artists, Megan Thee Stallion, Zero, Pimp C, and shared pastries from the small-town bakeries we passed. The commute had become so routine that Google Maps would tell me I was 180 miles from home every time I started my car in Austin. I was starting to feel like a local in Channelview too. I'd been welcomed into homes and invited to birthday parties, and I went to back-to-school events and homecoming parades. When I walked into the Starlight Bar, people greeted me with hugs and cold beers. I guess I'd finally convinced them I wasn't a cop. When I stopped by the service station barbershop to hear the latest gossip, the owner, Jenny, would ask me when I was finally going to cut my hair. I'd even adopted Greg's look and was sporting a mustache. Those experiences aren't exactly the norm for an investigative journalist, but they speak to the kind of place that Channelview is. That once you prove yourself, you're family. They helped me understand why people love the place so much, and why, with all its cultural shifts and with new families moving in, the next generation of Channelview residents has just as much to fight for as Carolyn and Greg do. Industry clearly has the advantage in this fight. Carolyn had seen that firsthand just a few days before our boat tour, at a meeting in the East Houston neighborhood of Pleasantville, about 20 minutes from Channelview. Pleasantville is known as the nation's first master-planned community for Black Americans, and it's been a bastion of resistance since the Civil Rights Movement. That night, the Port of Houston and the Army Corps of Engineers were there to talk about a new round of dredging in the Houston Ship Channel. It's called Project 11, and it's going to ease congestion and make way for bigger ships. Carolyn knew the dangers of dredging. So much dredge material had been hauled to Channelview over the years that it had taken over an island just 1,000 feet from her house. And now, a new batch of sludge would be going to Pleasantville. More than 100 residents showed up to protest the plan. Although their neighborhood is protected by zoning restrictions, it's surrounded by train tracks, industrial warehouses, and dredge dump sites. The cancer risk from air toxins in Pleasantville is in the top 1% in the entire country. People still remember when a 10-acre dredge dump site ruptured in 1957, flooding streets and homes with several feet of contaminated sludge.
We want you to understand the reason that we're trying to find out about trying to stop this is because of what we as a community have gone through. We still have the stuff that from back in 1957, that black stuff running through here.
I was there that night, and I felt the ripple of anger that spread through the room.
We don't want all this stuff. We have enough pollution as it is, enough chemical companies all along the port that have been poisoning people already. We don't need no more poison.
Carolyn watched intently from her seat in the back of the crowded auditorium. She'd never been to Pleasantville before, and she was one of the few white people in the room. But she felt at home. Pleasantville's fight against commercial greed and government negligence sounded like her fight in Channelview. Only, they were better organized. And they seemed to know even more about dredging than the government's presenters. This was the type of advocacy she wanted to bring to Channelview.
If you totally disregard the other communities or whatever, I don't want to associate with them, you might as well just stab yourself. It's like, look, come on, we're all facing the same problem. And let's learn from each other and try to get it solved. Because individually, obviously, we're not getting it done.
On Valentine's Day, 2024, Carolyn got a call from Amy Din, the Pitbull environmental lawyer from Lone Star Legal Aid. More than 5 years had passed since Amy filed a lawsuit on Carolyn's behalf against Harley Marine, the barge company that built its headquarters across the street from Carolyn's home. After a string of appeals, the case had landed on the desk of U.S. District Judge Drew B. Tipton, a Donald Trump appointee known for his hardline approach to the law. Tipton had made a final ruling, Amy told Carolyn. It was, unfortunately, what they'd been expecting. Carolyn's claim had been denied. Not because she had a bad case, but because it exceeded the 2-year statute of limitations. As Carolyn read Judge Tipton's ruling, she trembled with rage. One paragraph in particular stood out. Even if the court affords plaintiff the benefit of the doubt, she was aware of a purported actionable nuisance injury between March and April 2016, but did not file suit until over 2 years later. Tipton's assertion that Carolyn should have known to take legal action sooner felt like an insult to her intelligence. What hurt most was that, ultimately, she'd lost because it took her too long to find a lawyer, one who was willing to take on the petrochemical industry in its own backyard.
No one here had the money to get a lawyer to fight them. To find a lawyer, period, is very difficult because a lot of them, they're all embedded with, the marine and other industries.
Less than 3 weeks later, something even worse happened to Greg. Something that cast a shadow over the story I've been telling you. Something that made me rethink everything he told me before. Greg was out on a secluded section of the San Jacinto River, way upstream from all the barges, when it happened. He was getting ready to kick off the boat races he organized every year. People in chairs, golf carts, and boats lined the riverbanks, waiting for the fun to begin. A smattering of puffy white clouds drifted over the water. Greg was at the starting line when his phone started buzzing. At first, he ignored it. But when he saw that a neighbor had called him 6 times, he picked up.
My neighbor over there, she called me up because she was seeing a lot of smoke. She thought that the house was on fire.
Greg waved his arms frantically and hitched a ride on the race's rescue boat. He called another neighbor, the one he refers to as Junkyard Joe, before he even got to shore.
I asked him, I said, go over there and check on my house. He walked over here and the fire was shooting out the windows and everything, smoke and everything. And he said, yeah, your house is on fire. I drove over here as fast as I could get,
When Greg pulled into his driveway, all he could see was smoke and flashing lights. The Channelview Fire Department was there. So were trucks from nearby Highlands, Sheldon, and Cloverleaf.
What I seen was a big hole in the side of my trailer and firemen on the inside of it and them shooting water in it. And you could see straight through the trailer because, there was a hole out both sides of it. It was total down.
His workshop with his tools and equipment was safe. But the manufactured house where he'd lived for decades was destroyed. His furniture and TVs, his clothes, his hearing aids and blood pressure medicine, the boat race t-shirts he'd collected over the years, the only photos of his parents, all gone.
All I had was the clothes on my back. I didn't have nothing else. Like that, not even a toothbrush. I didn't even have nothing.
Greg's drones, the ones he'd used to monitor the barge companies from above, were ruined. So were his cameras and lenses, along with thousands of photos and videos he hadn't uploaded yet. Precious evidence of the barge company's encroachment into his neighborhood. The only thing left intact in the smoldering remains was his Smith & Wesson .44 Magnum. One of the firefighters had pulled it out of the rubble. Greg shoved the gun into his back pocket, just in case. Greg and several others there that day told me that the lead inspector from the Harris County Fire Marshal's office said it was an electrical fire caused by Greg's window air conditioner. But one of Greg's friends who showed up, an electrician, said that wasn't likely because the air conditioner was turned off and connected to a protective breaker. Chad Mickish, the Channelview Fire Department's investigator, had doubts too.
And kind of pointed down to the corner of the porch. In this case, there wasn't no ignition source in that area. And that's when I got suspicious.
Chad saw a series of odd-looking burn marks on Greg's wooden deck. It looked like someone had put out a bunch of cigarettes. But the marks were too big, too deep, and too spread out to be caused by cigarettes.
And that's kind of how we ended up with the determination, like, hey, something was poured right here.
As Greg stared at the charred remains of his home, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was a longtime friend, Michelle Gates. She said, out loud, what he was wondering. Whether someone connected with the barge companies had something to do with the fire.
I, went up to Greg and I was like, everybody knows on this day you're going to be on the starting barge. Don't you think it's a coincidence that you're out there for a couple of hours and your house gets burned down? This is not a coincidence.
In classic Channelview fashion, Greg's friends extended a hand when he needed it most. Michelle brought socks, t-shirts, a toothbrush, and some pants. His electrician buddy brought over a small camping trailer. That way, Greg could sleep on his property and keep watch over his workshop. Carolyn and Bobby delivered food and clothes. Another friend loaned Greg some money. Jackie Medcalf, the advocate from Highlands that Greg had worked with for more than a decade, got him a new computer and started a GoFundMe campaign to help him get back on his feet. Greg was grateful for all of it.
Like I said, I've got some really good friends, but the initial shock of what do I do next, What do I do, Where do I start? That was the big thing. Where do I start to try to get my life back?
Greg waited a few days to tell me about the fire. He was bellowing, ranting. I could almost feel him gritting his teeth through the phone. He was sure a barge company was behind it, that they wanted to punish him for his advocacy work, to shut him up once and for all. Me? I wasn't so sure. The idea that a barge company would actually burn down someone's house sounded too crazy to believe. When I met Greg in Channelview a few weeks later, he was calmer, but even more convinced that the fire was no accident.
I didn't care what the guy said about the electrical cord. That did not start that fire. That was caused by the barge company. Somebody told them to burn me out. They wanted to get rid of me. There was too much stuff that just didn't add up.
I felt for Greg. I really did. But I still figured what the fire marshal told him was probably right, that the fire was an accident caused by faulty wiring. But Greg wouldn't let it go. There was an edge to him I'd never seen before.
You're responsible to protect yourself, so I don't go very far from a gun. I'm going to be armed, so if you come out and mess with me, you're going to bleed out.
I figured this was Greg's paranoia talking. But as with so much of this story, my first instinct turned out to be wrong. A few weeks later, I got a call from Greg. He was excited, almost yelling. "Check your messages," he said. "I've got something for you to see." The picture that popped up on my phone showed a heavy-set man in black jeans and a white t-shirt standing on Greg's wooden deck. There was a red gasoline can beside him, and flames shooting out of a window. The photo was time-stamped, 1:48 p.m., March 2nd, 2024, the day of the fire. At first, I couldn't speak. I'd gone to Channelview to investigate chemical leaks. And now, here I was, faced with a crime. The kind you hear about on TV. Deanie and I headed to Channelview the next morning. Greg greeted me with a knowing grin that said, "I fucking told you." Then he walked me across a wooden plank and into the cramped RV camper his friend had loaned him. His smile grew wider as he told me what happened. After the fire, he had spent days combing through the charred remains of his house. Beneath a pile of ashes, he found a melted blob. It was the small electronic device that stored the footage from his outdoor security cameras. He thought its memory card might still be intact, so he took the melted blob to a friend who works in the tech industry.
Mark calls me up. He says, "You sitting down? You ain't going to believe what's on this thing." He says, "You got this guy trying to break in your front door, running around with a piece of pipe and a stick and all that, and 2-gallon gas can, and he comes through your driveway and knocked out your back window and lit the damn thing on fire, and you can see it blowing up. You can see the fire shooting out of it."
Greg pulled up the video for me. Sure enough, it showed a man in broad daylight. No mask, no face covering, committing arson. I could even see the license plate on his van. Greg said he'd never seen the man in his life. Greg felt validated. He had proof the fire was no accident. But why would a perfect stranger walk up in the middle of the day and burn Greg out? When I got back to my hotel that night, I pulled out my microphone and began recording.
I'm not a true crime reporter. This is fucking crazy. It seems so far-fetched. It seems like this is made up. And yet it's not. It's all real and it's all happening and it's evolving quickly.
Greg shared the security camera footage with the Harris County Fire Marshal's office. He felt like he'd done their job for them. So much for that electrical fire, huh? The arsonist wasn't hard to find. The van in the video was owned by Halcon, a transportation company that drives workers to and from job sites, including barge facilities. The employee who'd been using the van that day, 52-year-old Charles Howard, was quickly arrested and charged with arson. According to court documents, he said he was the man on the security footage. Charles Howard had no discernible connection to Greg. He didn't live in Channelview, and nobody I asked around town even knew who he was. It seemed obvious that somebody had put him up to it. A few days after Greg handed over the arson footage, an agent from the fire marshal's office asked him to come in and talk about a few things. Greg was confused. Why couldn't they just talk on the phone? Why couldn't they come to him? But the agent insisted. The next morning, Greg drove to the department's headquarters, north of Houston. Two agents took him into a meeting room. He said they kept asking if he'd masterminded the arson. You sure you're not going to go file an insurance claim on this, Greg? You sure?
I almost had a heart attack. I have to have flood insurance. But I couldn't get fire insurance or anything on the trailer because it was up so high in the air. Why would I burn my own damn house down if I didn't have insurance?
Greg was incredulous. First, a fire marshal inspector had dismissed his claim that the fire was arson. And now, they thought that he had orchestrated the crime? Greg said he told the investigators to look at the barge companies. Who else would want me gone from the river bottom? The fire marshal's office told Public Health Watch that its official reports say the fire was caused by arson, not an electrical issue. A spokesperson declined to comment further because the investigation is still ongoing. Nobody was more invested in Greg's story than Carolyn. They'd become close friends in the 5 years since they founded the Channelview Health and Improvement Coalition, or CHIC. They talked on the phone almost every day, sometimes several times a day, if Greg was amped up about something. They'd been by each other's side during advocacy meetings, community cleanup days, the COVID-19 pandemic, even the 2020 election when their candidate, Donald Trump, lost. And now this. Carolyn and Bobby installed more security cameras. They made sure their guns were locked and loaded. Instead of going with Carolyn to the CHIC meetings, as he always had, Bobby stayed home to protect their house.
One person leaves at a time. Someone's here all the time. You're your first line of defense. I'm sorry, I support the police, but they just can't be here. I mean, okay, I don't like to fight, but if you hit me, it's on. You know, I'm going to hit you back. Even if I don't have my gun on me, I'm going to hit you back. somehow, some way.
Greg even worried about my safety. During one of our phone calls, he gave me some advice.
If you're out there and they get wind of your podcast and all that, you don't have any idea what these people are capable of. I mean, you need a gun. You know, I mean, I've got guns. If you need one to use, whether it's in your car or on your hip, you need to carry it with you because you need to be able to protect yourself from these people.
I didn't take Greg up on his offer. I'm a reporter. Plus, I'm a lousy shot. I've only held a gun once in my life. But his warning gave me a taste of the fear he and Carolyn have lived with since the arson. I started sharing my location with my editor and my co-reporter, Savanna Strott, just in case. I already knew Carolyn and Greg were tough, but their reaction to the arson still shook me. It was as if I was talking with people from a bygone era, where danger was a given and quitting wasn't an option. Carolyn and I talked about that in her backyard.
To me, it says we've hit a nerve somewhere. So we're on the right track. We've got them a little more attention than they want. So if you're on the right track, why jump tracks? Now, hope they don't burn my house down. I have to laugh. It's not a laugh. Bobby would get mad at me for laughing, but, you know. You can laugh or you can cry, so I'm going to laugh. I didn't ever think that it would get to this measure, I guess, that they... you see that in the movies. This ain't real life.
Carolyn's advocacy was at a crossroads in another way, too. Chick had done some important things in Channelview, but Carolyn knew the organization had a long way to go, especially when it came to financing. For years, she'd avoided something that Greg kept urging her to do: make Chick a 501c3 nonprofit so they could accept tax-deductible donations and apply for grants. They could use the money to hire staff and broaden their impact. Maybe Carolyn could even be compensated for her time and for all those snacks she doled out at the meetings. When I asked her why she kept hesitating, I was reminded again that Carolyn had never wanted to be an activist. She hadn't chosen the job. It chose her.
It's a lot of responsibility to do the correct things. It's scary to have that much responsibility. It's very high stakes. You're talking about people's lives.
The 501c3 issue came to a head on a cold Thursday night, about a week before Greg's house burned down. 50 or so people, including me, filed into the Channelview fire station for Chick's monthly meeting. Among them was Terrence Narcisse, the founder and CEO of the East Harris County Empowerment Council. It's a nonprofit that connects people and organizations to a variety of programs, funding opportunities, and services. Terrence grew up in Barrett Station, a historically black community about 7 miles northeast of Channelview. It's unincorporated and has many of the same problems Channelview does. But Terrence was at the Chick meeting that night to organize, not commiserate. He was trying to unite East Harris County's nonprofits so they'd have a better chance of getting big grants. That way, they could train residents to become advocates and set up a network of air monitors across a dozen or so communities. There was just one problem. Channelview couldn't participate unless it had a federally recognized nonprofit. Terrence hoped Chick would take that leap.
We want to ensure that Channelview is at the table. We have to have somebody to hand the money to on behalf of Channelview.
As Terrence spoke, Greg almost jumped out of his seat in excitement.
I've been telling you for years, you need to get a 501c, you need to get some funding, so just sign up with the guy. Just sign up with him. You know, you can't do everything out of...
Carolyn's face flushed. the way it tends to when she's the center of attention. She tried to get the crowd to weigh in and take the spotlight off her.
I keep saying it, I am not chick, y'all are chick. I don't want to be the person who, for better choice of words, pisses off Channelview because I assumed more power or authority than anyone wanted.
But you are our voice.
I'm not, y'all are y'all's voices, I'm just
Putting it together.
Yes,
for us.
So,
Journalists don't usually participate in the meetings they cover. But after some more back and forth, I couldn't help myself.
Can we just see a show of hands of who's in favor of it? So every person who lives in Channelview has their hands raised. Everyone else who doesn't is just because we don't live here. So looks like that's a consensus.
Carolyn was their leader, whether she liked it or not. Chick had another limitation too. Although its Facebook page had around 1,000 members, only about 20 people usually showed up for meetings. Most were around retirement age, and most were white, in a community that's overwhelmingly Latino. The racial divide didn't seem intentional. It was more of a byproduct of the generational divide between Channelview's old-timers and newcomers. Still, Chick had to bridge that divide if it wanted to harness the full power of the community. And that's hard to do when an organization doesn't have money for marketing, events, or translators, and when its leader is shy and doesn't even use social media. Chick was making some inroads, though. In the spring of 2024, a small group of Latino residents started showing up at the meetings. The newcomer who stood out most was 40-year-old Julio Garcia, whose family moved to South Channelview when he was 9 years old. They lived in Carolyn's neighborhood, just a few blocks from K-Sol, the chemical storage and barge cleaning facility on Lakeside Drive. Julio didn't know about the plant's problems until he read a story Public Health Watch published in 2023. It revealed that state regulators had recorded high benzene emissions outside K-Sol for years, but had taken little action. He didn't know about Chick until his neighbor, Cynthia Benson, persuaded him to attend a meeting with her. I was there the night Julio stood up and addressed the room.
Thank God for Miss Carolyn. She's doing some great work. I'm kind of pissed off that I was oblivion to and I didn't know what was going on. We're here to see how we can help. If I got to gather signatures from the Hispanic community, if I got to go door knocking from door to door, that's what I would do.
I caught up with Julio before he left that night. He was still worked up about what he'd heard. He compared Channelview to Flint, Michigan, whose residents were infamously exposed to lead-poisoned water.
We're living the same thing and we don't even know it. It's an important issue. This is where I grew up. This is my home. And just to see it get contaminated without us knowing, it's like a slap on the face. We got serious problems here.
About 6 weeks after Greg's house burned down, Jackie Metcalf sent him an email from the Army Corps of Engineers. It said Holtmar had been given permission to dredge the San Jacinto River, near the river bottom. You remember Holtmar. It's the barge company run by Tom Marion, the vice president and lawyer for Buffalo Marine, and Paul Holt, the man people call Buffalo's fixer in Channelview. For years, Holtmar had been trying to carve out shoreside parking spots for barges north of the I-10 bridge. At first, Holtmar wanted to dump the dredge material near a park in Beach City. But that plan was shot down after Jackie and Greg alerted the town's city council. Then, Holtmar proposed sending the river sludge to the tiny town of Devers. The mayor of Devers begged the TCEQ and the Army Corps not to approve the plan. Harris County Attorney Christian Menefee opposed it too. Menefee was concerned about bringing more barges so close to the Superfund site. In a strongly worded letter to the Army Corps, he said that if a barge hit the waste pits and released dioxin into the river, it could, quote, have a catastrophic effect on water quality, human health, wildlife, and fishing. But the Army Corps approved the plan anyway. Greg was upset about the Army Corps' ruling. He didn't think any dredging should be allowed north of I-10, not with an active Superfund site so close by. But he was too preoccupied with his own struggles to worry about Devers. More than a month had passed since his house burned down, and he didn't feel any closer to justice. The fire marshal wasn't keeping him updated. Charles Howard had posted bail and was back in the free world. And he kept seeing Paul Holt around town.
I was just driving down, because I come down Market Street, and here he is sitting on the side of the road at the tire shop, and he sees me coming, and he rolls his window down, smiling with a big old grin like the cat from Alice in Wonderland. What the hell is that all about?
Greg's calls to me ramped up. The thing he'd always prized most about his life in the river bottom was his sense of freedom. Freedom to come and go as he pleased. Freedom to do as he pleased. But now, he felt shackled to his property.
They destroyed my life, you know? I mean, I can't go nowhere. I couldn't go to Jackie's or meeting. If I'd have showed up, what would they have done to my damn shop? What would they have done to my camper? Would they have tried to burn me out again?
Like I've said, I am not a true crime journalist, but I was trying to become one. My co-reporter Savanna and I spent months trying to figure out why Charles Howard had burned down Greg's house. The fire marshal's office said it couldn't answer questions while there was an ongoing court case. Charles Howard's lawyer at the time wouldn't talk to us either. So we started looking into a theory people around Channelview kept bringing up: that Paul Holt had engineered the arson. That he'd used a friend, Nick Peltier, as a middleman to hire Charles Howard. I called Nick to ask him myself.
Hello?
Hi, is this Nick?
Yeah.
Hey, Nick, we've had some issues raised to us regarding an arson that occurred in Channelview. Some folks had brought your name up and a Mr. Paul Holt's name up, and I wanted to call you to see if you'd heard about these things and, what your thoughts were about some of these allegations.
Okay. That's weird.
Why do you think people would say that?
Why do I think people would say that? Because we work for the tugboat company that's got all the land down where everybody else lives at.
Nick told me he'd worked with Buffalo Marine since 2015, and that Paul had worked for the barge company even longer. Nick mostly did small tasks: cleaning up Buffalo's properties, putting up fences. He described himself as the low man on the totem pole. He also confirmed that he and Paul were close. I told Nick that people were throwing his name around as a suspect in the arson.
I ain't gonna go out and burn somebody's house down. I'm stupid, but I ain't that stupid. Now, come on.
Had you ever heard the name Charles Howard before?
No. I have no idea who that is.
As our reporting continued, we had more questions for Nick. This time, Savanna called him. But the voice on the other line, which sounded an awful lot like Nick's, said they were someone else.
Hello. Hi. I'm trying to reach Nick Peltier. Is this him?
No, ma'am. You got the wrong phone number.
Okay, I'm sorry. Are you even in the Channelview area or anything?
Yeah, I stay in Channelview area, but I've never heard of him before.
Okay, got it. Well, sorry. What's your name, just so I can mark that you're the wrong phone number here?
Josh.
Okay. Got it, Josh. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Alrighty.
great. Okay.
You have a wonderful day.
Nick stopped answering our calls after that. And after months of calling, texting, and leaving voicemails, we reached Paul Holt one more time. His conversation with Savanna wasn't long.
Yeah, I don't know nothing about it. Anyway. Yeah, I don't have time for any questions. And
People have been saying that you're behind it, and we want to obviously get your take on it. We've been told that the fire marshal has talked to you about the case. Is that true?
No.
Paul hung up without answering our other questions. We still haven't been able to confirm whether Paul or Nick have been interviewed by the fire marshal or by the Harris County District Attorney's Office. 2.5 months after the fire, Greg got some desperately needed good news. Baker Wotring agreed to represent him in a civil lawsuit regarding the fire. It wasn't clear yet exactly who they were going to sue, but at least it was something. The law firm had a track record of winning high-profile environmental cases. It had even represented Harris County when it sued the companies responsible for the waste pits. If the fire marshal wouldn't bring Greg justice, maybe Baker Wotring could. I spoke with Greg's lawyers at their office on the 64th floor of the J.P. Morgan Chase Tower in downtown Houston. They didn't strike me as people who took on losing cases, but they told me almost nothing, and they wouldn't let me record the meeting. A few months after our meeting, Baker Wotring served Holtmar Land, LLC, with a subpoena. It asked the barge company to produce any and all communications that mentioned the fire and Greg Moss, along with Charles Howard, Paul Holt, and Nick Peltier. All the people Channelview residents kept telling me were involved in the arson. I keep a video on my phone that reminds me just how much Channelview has changed in the short time I've been reporting there. It opens up with a tranquil scene of green brush sagging lazily over the San Jacinto River. Then it pans to the right, and a chemical barge topped with red pipes comes into view. Soon, another barge shows up, then another. I took that video on September 12, 2024, as I stood on some old piers next to the Riverside Seafood and Grill. It's the local landmark where families once boated and swam. The business that's now owned by Tim Tom Land Holdings, one of the barge companies associated with Buffalo Marine. I went to that spot every time I was in the river bottom. It was a great place to look out at the marine traffic creeping north of the Interstate 10 bridge. I saw more barges and tugboats every time I returned. But that day, I noticed something new. Several of the barges were closer to the shore than usual, and some were tied to large wooden poles, just a few hundred feet from the restaurant. The one that co-owner Tom Marion once described to me as a family restaurant. Greg had predicted this would happen. More than a year before, he'd photographed workers driving the wooden poles into the riverbed near the shore. The Army Corps told Public Health Watch that Tim Tom had permits to do this. But acting legally and acting sensibly aren't always synonymous. Just a few years back, in 2017, the restaurant had been submerged by floodwaters from Hurricane Harvey. Putting chemical barges in such a vulnerable area seemed flat out dangerous. During my one interview with Tom Marion, I mentioned that residents were worried about the buildup of barges north of the I-10 bridge. That if barges broke loose during a storm, they could be thrown into homes or smash open the dioxin-filled waste pits, or act as floating bombs if another river fire broke out. Tom said Buffalo Marine had paid for a study of flood patterns in the river bottom. He said the study found that none of the flood patterns near their operation would carry barges toward the waste pits. He said the company has a plan to deal with catastrophic floods.
The Pat calls it the ant theory. You take all of your push boats and you essentially have them positioned around the perimeter of the barges. And they ride up with the barges and they ride down with the barges. So we've modeled it out. We're not worried about it. We really aren't.
Tom said he's read every letter from opponents of Buffalo's expansion efforts, but no one has made a compelling argument.
Look, it's great if there's a beautiful area for people to enjoy. I understand that. But it's not public property. This is not communism where everyone enjoys what everyone else owns. I don't mean to sound like the capitalist has no regard for the environment. That's why we made a conscious effort to ensure that the community had the riverside, the boat lounge, and all that other area to enjoy.
That conversation with Tom took place more than 18 months ago. I've contacted him 9 times since then to ask for another interview, to ask for a copy of the river bottom flood study, and for answers to written questions I'd sent over. I especially wanted to know more about Buffalo Marine's and Tom's relationship with Paul Holt. Both Tom and Paul are named on documents that Holtmar filed with the state. I also asked Tom about rumors that the barge companies were connected to the arson. But Tom never responded. There's a question that's bugged me since I started working on this podcast. Which agency is responsible for the barge buildup on the San Jacinto River? For more than a year, my colleagues and I contacted the 6 state and federal agencies that we know have some kind of authority in the area, trying to get some clarity. It was a frustrating, often fruitless process. When an agency said it wasn't responsible for a given task, it typically couldn't tell us who was. This is what we do know. The TCEQ enforces environmental laws from stationary sources. The only time they monitor barge emissions is when they load and unload chemicals at onshore facilities. The EPA regulates emissions, but only from vessels with engines, like the tugboats that pull the barges. They don't regulate emissions from the barges themselves. The Army Corps oversees projects that affect the navigation of the San Jacinto, like building a pier that juts out from the shore or dredging the bottom of the river. The Texas General Land Office and the Port of Houston rent out chunks of the river where companies can park their barges. The Coast Guard makes sure barges are safe to take out on the water. But no agency regularly monitors chemical emissions from barges when they're on the water. And no agency prohibits barges from entering what the EPA calls an area of concern near the waste pits. No agency prohibits companies from building or dredging there either. There's another, even more disturbing question that's been bothering us. Is there a comprehensive disaster plan for Channelview or for the San Jacinto River? Something that spells out precisely which agency would do what if a fire spread among the barges, or if a flood unleashed chemicals into the river bottom, or if a barge penetrated the waste pits. What's the plan if the San Jacinto catches fire like it did in 1994? Only this time, with chemical barges scattered throughout the river like landmines. The Coast Guard told us they're the on-call agency for emergencies on the water. But a spokesperson said they weren't aware of a specific disaster plan for the San Jacinto or for Channelview. The Coast Guard doesn't even have the capacity to move a barge on its own. They told us they'd ask private companies, other agencies, and nearby fire departments for help. Jimmy Sambera, who heads Channelview's fire department, worries about these things too. His firefighters are accustomed to being the first line of defense for chemical-fueled fires at plants and facilities. But his department isn't prepared for the type of disaster Channelview could face if a chemical fire spread among the barges.
What happens if the barge catches on fire, blows up, leaks? What? Guess what? It's in our jurisdiction, but we don't have fireboats and we don't do anything with that, to be honest with you. If that thing blew up and all we could do is help if fire approached the banks.
Sambera is a self-described small government conservative who displays a Trump flag in his office. But even he thinks there needs to be more regulation on the river.
You ask, who gave anybody the authority to go and put a pylon out in the middle of a river and park 10 barges at that? It's not their property. They didn't buy the middle of the Sage Center River. Well, is anybody going to do anything about it? No, we're not. Nobody knows. You call the Port Authority, and rightly so. It's not part of the port. It's the Sage Center River. But the port bleeds over into the Sage Center River. It's not our jurisdiction. Well, whose jurisdiction is it? It's nobody's.
Tom Ramsey, the only Republican county commissioner in Harris County, also worries about regulatory inaction in the river bottom. He worked in the Houston Ship Channel for years before entering politics. And what he sees has him concerned for his constituents.
I have no idea how anybody would ever allow barges north of I-10. Doesn't make any sense, particularly when you take into account it's got a Superfund site there. We know it's just a ticking bomb.
On February 20th, 2025, Greg and Carolyn headed to the Harris County Criminal Justice Center for Charles Howard's second hearing. They both hate driving in downtown Houston, so they piled into my car.
How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are y'all? How are you, Greg?
All right.
Greg's white hair blew as he trudged through the 25-degree weather. He looks like an old NASCAR driver from the 90s. Faded blue jeans, white sneakers, black and purple racing jacket. Carolyn was more formal. Dress boots, long olive green dress, hair pulled into a neat bun. When I first met Greg, he was a brash-talking guy with a take-no-shit attitude. His energy, even for a man in his late 60s, was unmatched. But on this day, he seemed downtrodden. He'd endured hurricanes, chemical leaks, and floods. His beloved dog, the one who used to chase squirrels with Deanie, died of heartworm disease. And there was, of course, the fire.
Even after a hurricane, at least you have something to rebuild. When they fill your house full of gasoline and light it on fire, you have nothing left. You crush up the pieces, you put it in a dumpster, and you haul it off to a landfill.
Greg felt like the authorities didn't think his suffering was worth their time. He said the fire marshal agent assigned to his case had even blocked his number. He felt abandoned. So abandoned that he didn't feel safe watching the boat races he'd organized for years. We talked about that a lot.
Well, I mean, they're taking away a big part of my life. I've been in the boat racing business for 30, 40 years, you know, and now I can't go to an organized event that's 10 miles from my house. I'm worried that they're going to come back and do something, or if I'm out there, they might come up to me and start some shit. I mean, it sucks big time. It's bullshit.
Public Health Watch asked the fire marshal's office if its agent had really blocked Greg's number. They declined to comment. We sat in a stuffy courtroom that day for 4 hours, waiting for the judge to call Charles Howard's name. Greg kept scanning the room, trying to find him among the rows of seated defendants. He took deep breaths to calm his nerves.
I'd really like to ask him why he did that. You know, I just really, really, really would like to go over there and say, why the hell did you burn down my house? Why did he burn it down? I don't know. That's crazy.
At 11:57 a.m., just 3 minutes before the docket closed, Charles Howard's name finally rang out. A bald man in a long-sleeve shirt and dark wash blue jeans walked past us toward the judge's bench. His lawyer, the judge, and the prosecution had a quick conversation. Then Charles Howard walked out the door. Another hearing was set for May 1st. On the drive back to Channelview, Greg seemed exhausted. Carolyn was angry for him.
Well, I mean, you know, kind of sucks that they didn't do anything. What are they going to do with him? Nobody's doing nothing. It doesn't make any sense.
Frustrated for Greg. I mean, it's 2 more months that he has to worry. So just frustrated for him, and I know it's.
See, I
hope he took his high blood pressure pill.
Oh, I did, but you know, kind of.
You're more chill than I expected.
Well, I mean, what can you do? I mean,
that's exactly right.
There's nothing you can do.
Greg's lawyers still haven't talked to me on the record for this podcast. The lawsuit they filed names Charles Howard, Halcon, the company he previously worked for, and a company that's now merged with Halcon. The barge companies aren't mentioned. Greg told me they don't have enough evidence to name anyone else. I've got a feeling there's going to be more to this story, based on a conversation I had with the new lawyer Charles Howard hired in February. Maverick Ray is a flamboyant lawyer who describes his firm as the Louis Vuitton of defense attorneys. His office is in a Victorian-era house that's painted all black. A white neon sign near his secretary's desk reads, #Fight for the people. The day we talked, he was wearing a brown and purple plaid suit. I asked Maverick about the rumors that his client was a pawn for the barge companies. The theory is that he was put up to it by somebody else, specifically that he was put up to it by someone who either works for or is connected to barge companies working in the area.
I mean, that definitely could be a plausible thing. I have not reviewed enough evidence or anything like that to be able to say if it's accurate or to be able to shoot it down even. So definitely plausible. And yeah, if there's something more bigger at play that could lead to a huge mitigation standpoint for Charles, if he, paid to do this or told to do this or duress, forced to do it.
In November of last year, K-Solve, the chemical storage facility near Carolyn's house, had a chemical leak. In case you've forgotten, K-Solve is the company that's had 2 massive fires in the last 2 decades. The one that Public Health Watch investigated for dangerous benzene emissions. There was no fire this time, but a vapor cloud of butyl acetate, which can cause shortness of breath and confusion, was released. Firefighters encouraged people in 3 nearby homes to evacuate until the leak was contained, about 2.5 hours later. The TCEQ didn't come out when the leak was in progress, but an agency spokesperson sent us a statement saying the leak had no off-site impacts.
You would think with the spotlight that y'all put on it and everything else that they would come out. I'm just kind of mad because here we are 5 years later and there has been a spotlight shined on it. It's a total free pass. So instead of paying more attention, they pay less attention. We haven't progressed very far.
Carolyn told me she now feels trapped in her home. She'd like to move away to a place that's nice and quiet and full of wildlife, the way South Channelview was when she and Bobby moved there. But they don't have the money to leave, and they probably never will. Their property isn't in a floodplain, so FEMA won't buy them out. The barge companies don't want their land because it's not on the water. And what family is going to buy a house that's across the street from a river filled with chemical barges? Greg would like to leave too. He's hoping FEMA will buy his flood-prone property so he can go somewhere peaceful. So he can find his next Channelview.
I want to buy me a piece of property, but that's one thing I'm going to look for, you know. What kind of industry was in the area? Is there any chance of contaminated ground? If I live close to the water, I want to be up high where I can look down on it.
Like Carolyn, he says his only option now is to keep pushing back.
Why keep doing it? Because if they burn me out, they'll burn other people out. If they can come into this little town and do it here, they can do it anywhere.
But there have been some wins for Channelview. Chick is working with the nonprofit Air Alliance Houston to build a local network of air monitors. And Carolyn said Chick will apply for 501c3 status this year. But the biggest win came in March, when the Army Corps canceled Holtmar's permit to dredge in the river bottom and dumped the river gunk in the tiny town of Devers. That victory was notched by Jackie Metcalf's nonprofit, the Texas Health and Environment Alliance. It sued the Army Corps for issuing Holtmar's permit without doing the required environmental testing. But their victory could be temporary. If Holtmar chooses to, it can come up with another plan and start the permitting process all over again. There's another victory, a very tiny one, that Carolyn tells herself is a symbol of greater things to come. It's a big metal sign that shows a yellow falcon, the Channelview High School mascot, taking flight. Welcome to Channelview, it declares in bold, blue letters. Carolyn's group worked with County Commissioner Adrian Garcia's office to get the sign paid for and installed. But for some reason, it was placed behind a couple of trees. She laughed about it with Savanna.
I did want to ask about the significance of the Welcome to Channelview sign. Why are you laughing?
That sign, it just got to the point of ridiculous. It should have been something so simple.
Carolyn pestered Garcia's office until the sign was moved. It's now in the center median on Sheldon Road, one of Channelview's busiest streets, where everyone can see it.
And it is now truly a symbol that they listen to us. We may have had to stomp our feet and throw a fit and, all of that stuff. But in the end, they finally listened to us and moved it.
In January of 2025, I sat down at my desk in Austin to start writing this final episode. It was an emotional moment. I'd spent nearly 2 years on this project, and the idea of ending it felt scary. Like I was already grieving the loss of something special. I still remember the first time I drove through Channelview. All I saw were its scars and shortcomings. I didn't understand why anyone would want to live there. But if this story has taught me anything, it's that everywhere is home to somebody. And that every community deserves to be treated with respect. Because when you get right down to it, that's all Carolyn and Greg, and the other people you've met in this podcast, are fighting for. Respect for the community they call home. Channelview didn't become an industrial dumping ground overnight. It happened over the course of thousands of decisions, made by people who've probably never even been there, let alone thought about its residents. and the price they pay for the plastics, oil, and rubber we all use. The price Channelview residents are paying is only rising. Last year, the human rights group Amnesty International named the area around the Houston Ship Channel, which includes Channelview, a sacrifice zone, a place where residents suffer, quote, devastating physical and mental health consequences and human rights violations because of the contamination they're forced to live with. Just last month, February 2025, Channelview got more devastating news. The state's two top health agencies released a report about Harris County's industrial east side. The agencies found significantly greater than expected rates of several types of cancer, including leukemia, lymphoma, lung, cervical, and bronchus cancers. A map published in the report shows Channelview at the heart of the study area. And then there's climate change, which is adding yet another layer of danger for Channelview residents. According to John Nielsen Gammon, the official climatologist for the state of Texas, future natural disasters in Channelview could be supercharged by climate change. He said the chances of the next big storm will skyrocket with each passing year. As sea levels rise, land sinks along the San Jacinto River, and more intense hurricanes move into the Houston Ship Channel. Here's how he put it in an email to me. Roughly speaking, the odds of a storm surge above any significant level you pick, 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet, will have doubled by the middle of this century. So whatever your nightmare scenario, it's going to be twice as likely as it used to be. As I said from the outset of this podcast, Carolyn Stone is a stubborn woman. She's also relentlessly optimistic. But she's not naive. She knows the stakes have never been higher. For her community and for herself. Any day could be the day the big one finally happens. When nature and industry collide and everything goes black.
If it's an explosion, I don't expect my house to be there. My property, I expect it to be gone. I hope I'm not home. If I am home, it's like, all you who know about all this, please fight for us. Please bring it to attention. This was known. These people fought against it. These people brought it to the attention, and they were ignored, basically said, you're not worthy of a safe environment.
Fumed is a production of Public Health Watch. It was written and reported by me, David Leffler. Additional reporting by Savanna Strott and Salina Arredondo. Susan White was my editor. Our executive producer was Jordan Gass-Pooré. Our senior producer was Salina Arredondo. Savanna Strott was an assistant producer. Jana Cholakovska and Jordan Gass-Pooré provided additional research. Our music was composed and performed by Michael Ramos. Additional music by Epidemic Sound. Mark Bush was our sound engineer. Fact-checking by Enna Alvarado. Artwork by Matthew Fleming. Special thanks to our distribution partners at Texas Public Radio and to the Texas Tribune for studio and technical support. Also, thanks to Joanne Farian, Lynn Perry, and Chris Worthington for their advice and encouragement. Jim Morris is the Executive Director and Editor-in-Chief of Public Health Watch. To see pictures of Carolyn and Greg and learn more about Channelview, go to fumedpodcast.com. Hey, it's David again. I hope you'll consider donating to Public Health Watch, the nonprofit news outlet that produced Fumed. Go to publichealthwatch.org to contribute. Thanks.